Great. Let us know when we're going live, and then we can
Yeah.
start.
Sure. A small note to everyone joining. We are uploading our webinar on Facebook Live right now, so we should be starting shortly, approximately 1 to 2 minutes. A small note to everyone joining in. We are uploading our webinar on Facebook Live. We should be starting in a couple of moments.
Yeah, just one quick question. I mean, is it the language mixed, English, Urdu, or just English?
English will be the primary language for this panel.
Great. So we'll start now. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Asman Asrar Safi, and I serve as the chair of the Harvard-Pakistan Forum along with Muhammad Usman Umar. We are incredibly glad to have everyone with us today and would love to wish everyone a very happy Independence Day. Before we move to our panel discussing the crisis of education in Pakistan in the context of COVID-19 and introducing our panelists, I would like to say a few words about HPF's role as an organization. Not only do we want to promote conversations regarding pertinent issues concerning Pakistan, but HPF also serves as a platform to foster an ecosystem of individuals and organizations working towards the same broad goal of bringing resources to and drawing attention towards Pakistan. We have partnered with one such organization called the Dil Internship Project. The project's founder, Mustafa Kamal, is here with us today, and we invite him to quickly brief our audience about the nature of his organization. Mustafa, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say I'm very conscious that I am by far the least qualified person here, so I won't take too much of your time. So the Dil Internship Project really does share a lot of the objectives of the Harvard-Pakistan Forum and many of the speakers that you heard yesterday and the ones that you'll hear in the next couple of days. And that is essentially, in simple words, to reevaluate how we look at Pakistan. Often when you look at dialogues about Pakistan in the media, it is Pakistan is this or that, and they're very monolithic or unidimensional. And that's something that we want to challenge at the Dil Internship Project. So essentially what our organization or social enterprise is designed to do is to ensure an equitable distribution of resources that are geared towards Pakistan's success, no matter where they are. So over the last 2 years, we've actually enabled a transfer of human capital from the US, the EU, the UK to Pakistan to complement the narrative of charity that is so embellished all over the world. So Pakistan becomes a natural destination for your skills and talent, as well as a natural destination for charity. And I'm so pleased in this panel that after I leave it, the people that are going to be discussing it have been inspirations along the way. And I'm sure they won't remember me, but Professor Hoodboy was at Oxford last year, and he spoke about how the deficiencies of the Pakistani university system. And we're so pleased to be working with LUMPS in tackling that. And similarly, Shafqat Sir was so kind enough to introduce us to TEFTA, which is a skills organization based in Punjab. And we're actually working on a lot of pilot studies to upskill individuals who actually haven't received any formal education, and to make sure that they have the talent and the skills to confront the 21st century. But thank you so much. That's enough from me. I really appreciate the platform provided by the Harvard-Pakistan Forum, and I look forward to the discussion from much more esteemed people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. Now that that's done, we would like to introduce our panelists for today's panel. Firstly, we have Mr. Shafqat Mahmood, who is MPA class of 1981 from Harvard Kennedy School and is a Pakistani bureaucrat turned politician who serves currently as the Federal Minister for Federal Education and Professional Training and Federal Minister for National History and Literary Heritage, in office since 20th August 2018. He has been a member of the National Assembly of Pakistan since August 2018. Previously, he was member of the National Assembly from June 2013 to May 2018, and member of the Senate of Pakistan from March 1994 to March 2000. He served as Federal Minister for Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Livestock, Ministry of Environment, Urban Affairs, Forestry and Wildlife, and Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development in the Federal Cabinet of Prime Minister Malik Miraj Khalid from November 1996 to February 1997. We are so glad to have you here with us, sir. Next up, we have Dr. Tahir Andrabi, who is Stedman Sumner Professor of Economics at Pomona College and was the inaugural Dean of the School of Education at LUMPS. With a doctorate in economics from MIT, Professor Andrabi is a visiting researcher at LSE, a visiting scholar at MIT, and a consultant for the World Bank. He is also a co-founder for the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan. Professor Andrabi has been instrumental in primary school-related policy planning in Pakistan. His research work includes the Learning and Education Achievement in Pakistan Schools, LEAPS project, a 4-year longitudinal study on quality of primary education in rural Punjab. Between 1999 to 2000, he was also a member of the tax and macroeconomic committees of the Economic Advisory Board of the Government of Pakistan. Next, we have Dr. Parvez Hoodboy, who is a Pakistani nuclear physicist and activist. He was the professor of nuclear and high energy physics and the head of the physics department at the Quaid-e-Azam University. He graduated and also received a PhD from MIT and continues to do research in particle physics. He received the Baker Award for Electronics in 1968, and the Abdus Salam Prize for Mathematics in 1984. He has authored various scientific research papers in peer-reviewed journals and is also a prominent environmental and social activist and regularly writes on a wide range of social, cultural, educational, and environmental issues. Our fourth panelist today is Ms. Khatija Bakhtiar, who began her career with Angan, an Islamabad-based nonprofit working to improve women's and children's emotional health and protection against violence. She was first introduced to Teach for All in 2010 as a Fulbright scholar at the Goldman School for Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley, and was inspired by the Teach for America alumni in her program to adapt the approach in Pakistan in partnership with a local foundation. As Director of Programs and later CEO of Teach for Pakistan, Ms. Khatija played a critical role in developing all aspects of the program and the organization and leading recruitment and placement of 3 cohorts of teachers across 2 regions. Our fifth panelist today is Dr. Ammar Ali Jan, who is a renowned Pakistani academic, historian, and activist. He holds a doctorate degree in history from the University of Cambridge and has taught at institutions such as Punjab University and Forman Christian College. His work explores the intersection of communism and nationalism in colonial India by examining how European ideas are extended as they circulate in the non-European world. As an activist, however, he has been an eminent member of the Hukuk-e-Khalq movement, dedicated to safeguarding the constitutional rights of Pakistani citizens, as well as the Student Solidarity March. Lastly, we would like to introduce our panelist, our moderator, Ms. Zainab Qureshi, who has been of immense help in helping us design as well as manage this conference. Ms. Zainab Qureshi is director of the LEAPS program at the Evidence for Policy Design program, a research-based initiative aimed at improving education in Pakistan at the Harvard Kennedy School. She oversees implementation of the RISE program in Pakistan. Ms. Zainab previously worked as academic director at the JAQ Education Trust, where she developed and piloted an alternate model of education in low-income schools. She has worked at various organizations across the education sector in Pakistan, including the Aga Khan Education Service, Developments in Literacy, BRAC Pakistan, and some universities. She holds a master's in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a BA in economics and international development from McGill University. We are honored to have all of you here and would now like to hand over the panel to Ms. Zainab Qureshi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asmar. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. A very happy Independence Day to you all, and thank you very much for being here with us today. I'm really excited about this distinguished panel, and I look forward to an insightful conversation about education with all of you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we have seen a very spirited debate on education policy and curriculum over the last few weeks in Pakistan. But we'd like to focus this panel on the pressing and unprecedented crisis that we find ourselves in the midst of, and the challenges and the unique challenges and opportunities that it gives rise to. As you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced about 1.6 billion students across the world out of school for nearly 6 months. This is going to have devastating consequences on students, and it's going to have devastating consequences on students across the board for different groups, different socioeconomic strata, and different levels of education. In Pakistan specifically, we were facing a pretty severe learning crisis before COVID-19 hit. Less than 50% of 5th graders in Pakistan can read or write a sentence in their local language. That means less than half our population is functionally literate or is going to be functionally literate or functionally numerate. The COVID-19 pandemic is only going to make this worse. It is going to exacerbate the learning crisis. It is going to lead to significantly increased learning losses, and it is going to raise learning inequalities across the board. So what we would like to talk about today with all our panelists is what are the unique challenges that we're seeing today because of COVID-19? How should we be looking to tackle them? And most importantly, is there a way to view this crisis as an opportunity for us to be able to really take a long, hard look at our education systems, to be able to rethink education, and to be able to realign our schools and our institutions of higher education towards learning and developing our human capital? And so basically the question is it a realistic possibility for us to be able to build back better in a post-COVID world? With that, I'd like to turn to our first panelist, Dr. Tahir Andrabi, who has just released a groundbreaking research paper on the impacts of the earthquake of 2005 on education and student learning outcomes. So, Dr. Andrabi, could you please summarize the key findings of that research study with us? Could you tell us what implications it has for us today? And most importantly, could you share your view on what you think we need to do now? And is it realistically possible to be able to come back better from this crisis? Over to you. Professor Andrabi, you're on mute, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Zainab, for setting us on the right stage in terms of thinking about post-COVID and how to build back better. It's really great to be as a part of this panel, and particularly happy to be with Pervez after a very long time, and with Khatija, of course, and Amar, and special gratitude for Shafqat Saab to take time away from cricket and Independence Day to be on this panel. Thank you, Shafqat Saab. Yes, so this is, listen, 2005 earthquake. There was a huge gap in schooling that happened, and we had been tracking these kids, about 25,000 children or so, at various distances from the fault line, so we could figure out what shock they had, and in particular in terms of school disruption. And so we found two things. One is that kids who were away from the fault line, and I'm talking about like 50 miles away from the fault line versus right on the fault line, we found huge learning losses 4 or 5 years after the earthquake. In particular, a kid 5 years later who was in 4th grade, close to the fault line, had learning levels of about a 2nd grade kid away from the fault line. So 2 years of learning losses in something like 4 years. So that's a huge learning loss. The second was that most of these learning losses were concentrated on kids from lower socioeconomic status, and we were measuring that by mother's education. About 75% of our kids, this is a rural sample, had moms who were completely illiterate. So all the learning losses were concentrated in those kids. So basically it meant that we had huge learning losses and that learning inequality between the people who could mitigate them and not increase very dramatically. The third thing, which I think is really most relevant for the current situation right now, is that we did some mediation analysis, and we are saying that the losses did not happen just because of the school closures. In fact, most of the losses came about after kids went back to school. And I think that's the key point, and I think that's what I'd like to think about. You know, there's only so much we can do. We have had these television channels, etc., as to when schools are closed. But when we go back, I mean, the issue is if we go back and pretend as if it is business as usual and do not recalibrate our teaching to meet children where they are, but keep on teaching back to the textbook, keep on teaching back to the syllabus, or except as opposed to trying to think about targeting children where they are. If that doesn't happen, then the current losses will actually compound and in fact handicap these people, not just for this year, but coming forward. So in that sense, it's very clear what we at least can try to do. Our curriculum, we have had a huge debate on the curriculum. Apart from any other issues in the curriculum, our curriculum is actually a very ambitious curriculum. And one of the big problems with this rote memorization and stuff comes because we want our kids to know too many things. And the pressure is to finish the syllabus. Well, it cannot happen this year. This year we have to go back, and I would propose that we need to go back and seriously think about a targeted instruction program that focuses on reducing, simplifying the curriculum, focus on foundational mastery. And that's our opportunity to really get away from this teaching to the textbook. I think if we continue the business as usual, apart from the regular problems that it creates, this year we are really looking at the possibility of a lost generation, which not only will suffer this year, but because it won't be prepared for the subsequent years, it might be very serious long-term losses. The good news is this is possible. We can measure these learning losses. We can think about inequality, and there is a lot of willingness in governments, both Punjab and the federal government. We have been talking to them about coming up with programs which we might teacher support programs that could aim at simplification of the curriculum and foundational mastery. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andrabi. That was extremely insightful. And I'd like to maybe add something on to what Dr. Andrabi didn't explicitly mention, which is that in addition to learning losses, which is huge in itself, because we're talking about children who are not functionally literate, this also has direct implications. It's directly correlated to your propensity to earn over your lifetime, right? So wages are linked to how much you know, to learning and to number of years in school. And so the kinds of learning losses Dr. Andrabi is talking about will directly actually correlate with less earnings over children's lifetimes, which is, a livelihoods issue in addition to all else that we're discussing over here. With that, I'd like to turn to Ms. Khadija Bakhtiar. Khadija, you lead Teach for Pakistan, that is a program that works in low-cost schools and helps improve the quality of low-cost schools. You work with teachers, you train teachers. How do you see COVID-19 impacting your work? Do you think that our teachers are going to be ready for the challenges that they will have to face in another few weeks when schools reopen? And what do you think needs to be done to help train and empower teachers to be able to actually tackle these challenges better?
Thank you, Zainab. I think so for organizations and people and institutions that are doing the kind of work that Teach for Pakistan is doing, really the question for us throughout the last 6 months has been, what is it really that we are battling? Is it COVID? And the answer that we came to quite quickly, fairly early in the game in March was, it's not COVID. We work, our mission is to end education inequity in Pakistan. And if we don't lose sight of that core purpose, then it is easier for us to not get paralyzed by what we see as really dramatic challenges in being able to continue learning or being able to support kids when they do come back to school after schools do reopen. Now, staying grounded in this mission of we're going to tackle education inequity, I think one thing that we've learned is, you're talking about teachers. We've learned why it is so important to be talking about teachers, right? Because in a crisis like COVID-19, this being able to respond, being able to understand children's needs and families' needs and being able to respond accordingly wasn't an exercise that could have been done at a high central level. And then clear instructions passed down to foot soldiers who would then go and implement in diagnosing needs or being able to meet those needs. It is a very, very individualized effort, and it took leadership at a very local level and in a very collective fashion. By which I mean, for us, for instance, at Teach for Pakistan, we're currently teaching 2,500 kids in Islamabad public schools in marginalized communities of the rural subsectors of Islamabad. And for us, when COVID-19 hit, we realized that these kids have, of course, we can see the learning losses in front of our eyes. They're going to unravel in the next few months, but they're going to be impacted not just by not getting any instructions. The reality is that these kids and their families are under enormous financial strain, under enormous emotional pressure. Their routines, their spaces for safety, which were often their schools and classrooms and their schoolmates, have been completely disrupted. So the challenge in and of itself, right? How do you now reach these kids can feel paralyzing, especially when you look at the data. So of the 2,500 kids, even through this massive efforts with every single one of our teachers and our staff members, trying to call every single child, reach them through other teachers in the school, through other community members, through other parents, we were only able to reach about 70% of them. And of that number, less than 40% had any kind of access to a smartphone that had data. And the remaining 30% had only an SMS-enabled phone, right? And so the challenge of how do you continue learning, support kids emotionally, get families what they need in terms of basic supplies in the face of this kind of connectivity issues feels paralyzing, right? But I think that's where the earlier connection to and being rooted in purpose is something that really helps us. And I would say in terms of an opportunity and what we have learned through the last 6 months that I think is quite instructive for what the rest of the teaching force can be doing is very much along the same lines as what Tahir was saying. I think if I try and simplify in some ways, or try and make it more real for me in the way that I best understand what Tahir was saying, is root teaching and learning now and what this child actually needs, as opposed to projecting on them some assessment of our own, of what we believe it is good for them to learn, right? So root it in what they actually need, both in terms of learning, I think, and also in terms of the healing that needs to happen now when kids are going to be coming back to school. Also in terms of the safety and health protocols that must be in place, to make sure that this kind of learning exercise can take place and not be disrupted again. So I think that's one, right? So rooting it in child's actual needs. I think the other thing to my mind is, a lot of people have been talking about the kind of digital skills that teachers need to learn, and that's a very real challenge, particularly I think for older teachers who do not have as much comfort with new technology. I think it does take some time for them to get comfortable with something like that. But honestly, to my mind, just being able to or help them develop technical skills feels like less of a challenge. And I think the bigger thing that is needed here is a complete reorientation of what is going to be asked of teachers in the coming school year. Their role is going to completely change. They are not just pedagogical leaders now, although of course that is a very important role, but they have to stand as supports for their school and that community in a very real way, right? And I think this reorientation of the role, with that comes a very real understanding of the challenge, right? I mean, you will hear of organizations like Teach for Pakistan, but also other organizations like Zindagi Trust or like TCF, whose teachers, right, the frontline education staff has been involved and engaged through the whole COVID crisis. But the mass of teachers, particularly in our public school systems and our low-cost school systems who reach the mass of our children, they've really kind of sat on the sidelines while this crisis has unfolded for kids, right? And so my biggest fear right now is that those teachers are completely disconnected with the reality of these kids, right? So diagnosing is part, yes, put a tool in front of the child and take a test and assess what his current learning level is. But the other piece of the diagnosis is, does this teacher have, who's going to be teaching them and working with them for the next 1 year, are they coming in with the emotional and mental holistic understanding of what has this child really been through in the last few months, and what is this going to ask of me, right? And so I think that is the thing that worries me the most, but also serves to me as the greatest opportunity that finally we can then now say, let's have a conversation with teachers about what exactly is your role and how are you going to have to own this, because the success and failure of our school reopening is going to depend on you as the linchpin of it all.
Thank you, Khadija. I think those are some fantastic points. And if I understand you correctly, you're basically saying what we need is a paradigm shift in how we think about schooling, how we think about the role of teachers. And what we're basically saying is that teachers need to act almost like doctors to diagnose what each child needs, and combining what you said to what Dr. Andrabi said earlier, to basically, diagnose what children need and then target those needs, be it educational or otherwise. Now, my question, and we will wait, but we will pose this question to Shafqat Saab about how we plan to do something as huge as this at scale across a country like Pakistan, where we already deal with human resource constraints and capacity constraints. But before we go there, I would actually like to first turn to Dr. Hoodbhoy and get his take on the higher education situation in Pakistan right now. Dr. Hoodbhoy, you've been critical of universities and institutions of higher education in Pakistan, of how they have dealt with the COVID crisis. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you think the biggest constraints are, on what you think needs to happen when things reopen in the fall? And to you, I guess I would also ask, if we were to go back down, God forbid, into a second lockdown, what should we be doing differently?
Well, thank you for posing a very relevant question. So when COVID-19 came along, I was, of course, I wasn't happy, but I said, look, there's a marvelous opportunity here, because it can now give us a chance to look inside the classroom and what is being taught in colleges and universities across Pakistan. Since in-person classes are impossible, now we have to go in for distance learning. And distance learning opens vast possibilities. So, look, you asked me what's wrong with higher education in Pakistan. I don't want to repeat what I've said over the last 40 years since I've been teaching at universities in Pakistan. I've taught for 45 years at Quaid-e-Azam University. There's an awful lot wrong over there. And the biggest thing is that in the hard sciences, and I'll confine myself to the hard sciences, by which I mean mathematics and physics, because these are the very core from which you get everything else. You get engineering from here, you get chemistry from there, and so forth. Okay, now the problem is that Pakistan in 1947 did not have a tradition of the hard sciences. And so our math and our physics has been extremely weak. So if you go into a classroom, the chances are that you will see that students are being taught wrong stuff, or stuff that is right but taught in a wrong way. And so here was a chance where you could have actually the online lectures being available to university authorities, to a central authority, and perhaps available to everybody. And so instead of the opaqueness that you have, now you would have transparency. So in fact, where I was teaching until recently, I suggested it to the college administration, and they didn't like it. But then I had an opportunity to discuss this on television with Dr. Tariq Banouri, who heads the Higher Education Commission. And he said, yes, it's sort of a good idea. What I proposed to him was, let's have a central repository so that teachers can deposit their weekly lectures, and these weekly lectures can then be viewed by everybody. So it would have several advantages, one being that, look, now anybody who has the desire can go and learn from those lectures. But secondly, it also tells you that, okay, certain teachers really shouldn't be in a university at all because they just don't know their subject. And third, it'll tell you of those who are actually cheating. Cheating, for example, I can tell you of a teacher who uploaded 3 lectures, and they were of 2.5 minutes each. And in fact, one was a repetition of another. So that sort of thing is not a freak incident occurrence. It's something that is very, very usual. And in fact, let me be very frank, there was a teacher who put up yellowed notes, and this was his contribution to teaching at a certain university. Well, and those notes went back to 1976. Okay, so here is an opportunity. That opportunity is still there. I repeat, what we need in Pakistani universities is transparency. We need to be able to go inside the classroom and be able to see what the professors are teaching. And if we can do that, then we will know which teachers to reward, which teachers to keep, and which should be asked to leave. I'm afraid this is a big problem for Pakistani universities, especially since there was a massive expansion in 2002, and we started making universities without even caring who would teach in them. And so whoever managed to get a degree, and you know how easy it is to get a PhD degree from a Pakistani university. I mean, who couldn't, frankly? These people were then hired as university teachers, and now they're producing more like themselves. So to stop this rot, it's absolute rot, we now have the option of online teaching. And if it is monitored and if it is made of high quality, then I say that even a second semester of online teaching would be actually good for Pakistan.
Thank you, Dr. Hudboy. That actually, your last point segues nicely into some of the points that Dr. Amar has been raising in recently on the limitations of online learning and the digital divide, and how the digital divide is actually contributing to increasing education inequality and increasing learning inequality in Pakistan. So, I guess I would ask you, Dr. Amar, what are your thoughts on this? And, can you elaborate a little bit on your criticism? And to Dr. Hudboy's point right now, what would your alternative be to online teaching and learning?
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to the Harvard Pakistan Forum. I think the points that have been raised are very serious issues. I mean, I think one thing that Dr. Andrabi and Ms. Bakhtiar emphasized is the fact that this is an opportunity to rethink education in Pakistan, which I completely agree with. I mean, disasters, moments of great danger and our tragedies, but they're also great opportunities to reinvent and rebuild, reconstruct society. So after destruction, there is reconstruction, and all societies have to go through this process. And what Dr. Hudboy just elaborated is why this reconstruction is so difficult in the context of Pakistan. And the word that he used, and I want to emphasize this, is transparency. The way our higher education system is working, and this can probably be extended to our schooling in general, it's very difficult to find any transparency precisely because anybody who is willing to criticize the system, they're immediately shown the door. I mean, this is something that Dr. Hudboy alluded to, but this is exactly what happened to him. This is what has happened to many, many academics in Pakistan who want to give new ideas, who want to challenge or shake up the system a bit, who can see the rot that has set in. But you have so many entrenched forces within our education system that you're immediately targeted as a troublemaker. And this is part of how we are viewing education in Pakistan. Remember, I mean, I've taught at universities since 2016, and this is a particularly difficult period because this is the beginning of what the state or certain apparatuses within the state thought was the beginning of the 5th generation war. And universities were viewed as central sites for this war. So if you are thinking of universities not as places of critical thinking, of dissent, of education, I mean, universities are supposed to be places where people are able to ask the questions that society is too afraid to ask. But if you are trying to say that this is a war zone, then you can't really have that kind of open discussion during a war. War demands a certain kind of discipline and obedience. And this is what we've been seeing for the past many years. And during the COVID crisis, I mean, since March, students have been protesting again and again across the country, precisely because of the nature of this digital divide. I mean, you have students in former FATA. I was teaching about, in my class alone, there were about 8 students from former FATA. And the area does not have Wi-Fi. Same is true for large parts of Balochistan, for Gilgit-Baltistan, even for rural Punjab. And we're supposed to teach them. So, every time, if you're teaching with one of the aims of teaching is to bring some kind of equality, is to give people an opportunity that society, historical circumstances did not give them. My feeling as a teacher was every time I'm teaching without these students, I'm actually perpetuating inequality. I'm participating in furthering, in escalating this inequality that exists in society. And this is across our education landscape. So the main question for these students was, how do we ensure that these students get some relief, either internet facilities, or as Dr. Andrabi was saying, maybe reduce the burden of education, maybe rethink education for a while in terms of the core subjects, core concepts, or maybe just like give them some kind of a promotion without the rigorous testing that was required earlier. What has happened over the past 5-6 months is that students, unfortunately, have not been heard. If you look at the question section, the comment section, even in this talk, there's students from UET who are like spamming almost this conversation. And one of the crises that they're facing is that they have an exam, like the examination begins on the 17th of August. And it's an on-campus exam. It is a disaster for these students. For their families are worried, students are worried, because you are risking the precious lives of these students. And yet they have no representation. If they're not even willing to come, such students are not even willing to take their names because they feel there will be a reaction from the administration. So the way the authoritarian structure in which universities are operating, I think this is a good time to question that, because it will not work. It will not work not only because it will fail students, it will also eventually lead to a greater distrust in the entire education system in Pakistan. And I'll just end by saying there has been this pattern of ignoring the voices of students. This past 1 year, there's been more mobilization by students than in the last 30-35 years. We saw the case in University of Balochistan, the sexual harassment case, which was a massive case, and students were very brave to raise that issue. Similarly, at Gomal University in DI Khan, then you have the Student Solidarity March, where people from across the country, students were on the streets demanding union representation. In each case, the students were vilified. They were called seditious. They were called troublemakers. There were sedition charges brought against the organizers. Gomal University has just taken action not against the teacher who was accused of sexual harassment, but against all the students who were protesting. And I think this just shows us that there is a major crisis of representation. And if we are to come out of this crisis with an education system that's intact and that can respond to the challenges of our times, we have to address this digital divide, which requires, of course, a lot of investment as well. And you know what Dr. Tariq Banouri recently stated in one of his interviews, this HEC is right now undergoing the worst financial condition it's ever been. So, I mean, we have to reverse our thinking and really look at health and education as very serious sectors that need investment, because our future depends on that, health, education. And the second and last thing we need to do, we need to talk to the real stakeholders, which are the students. No policy, whether it's the national curriculum, whether it's the education policy, whether there are debates on digital divide, it is impossible to formulate a policy without taking into account students who are no longer silent. They've been protesting, they've been writing, they've been shouting, but it is time we start listening to students, whether they're from UET, Gomal, Balochistan, Karachi. I think this is a good time for us to start treating students as future leaders, as our future colleagues, rather than continuously infantilizing.
Thank you, Dr. Mar. Thank you very much for that. Shafqat Saab, there are a lot of great points that have been brought up. We've identified several very large challenges to the system, and when the PTI government came in with a huge mandate for education and education equality, right? We have seen issues right now, just in the last half an hour, we've talked about issues of quality, issues of inequality, the impact of the COVID crisis on students, on learning losses, on teachers and what they need, on institutions and, on higher education institutions and what is needed there, and on the digital divide and, how we're going to basically move Pakistan into the 21st century, and whether this really is an opportunity. So all of those questions to you: what is the government thinking of doing about this? And How are you thinking this is an opportunity for us to build back better? Shafkat Saab, you're on mute though.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this webinar. And it has given me an opportunity to listen to people who are experts in education. I'm not an expert in education, I'm a politician. But I've been engaged now with education for the last 2 years. So there are a number of things that we have initiated, a number of things that we are doing. But today we are focusing on COVID and how that has impacted education. And of course, it has a huge impact on education. As it is, our learning levels, which the World Bank has come up with a new terminology, learning poverty, was very high. And obviously, this closure of schools for 6 months is going to add to the lack of learning that was already there in a very large number. And of course, a large number of our children are not even in school. So we have a huge number of students who are out of school. So, I mean, young children who are out of school. So when we were faced with this completely unprecedented situation, we, in a sense, followed what was happening in the West, and we closed all our schools. And when we closed our schools, we immediately thought that we don't know how long this is going to last. So let's try and do something for the children. So within 15 days, we scrambled and we were able to launch a teleschool. And the teleschool, we were very fortunate that, and in fact, it came as a revelation to me that our education technology companies had a fair amount of content available. And therefore we were able, and they were very kind, they offered their content to us free of cost. So within 15 days, we were able to launch a teleschool in which it would start at 8 o'clock and go on till 6 in the evening. And we divided the various classes into various time slots. And we realized that that was obviously a very imperfect solution and something that had not been really successful in the past when it was tried. But we thought that we can't just sit back and not do anything. So lately Gallup, which is an independent organization, came up with a survey and said that about 7 to 8 million children are logging into teleschool every day. We also started a feedback mechanism through SMS. So we get what can be called FAQs on various things and so on and so forth. The second option that we had was online. And online actually brought into focus that the digital divide is really also basically a class divide, because in the school systems, the elite schools were able to launch online classes for their students, whereas the rural schools, the government schools, the madrasas, etc., obviously did not have this capacity. So this was a real problem. On the university side, we had meetings with HEC, and we said that universities can on their own launch online learning and courses and so on. And then we ran into what has been referred earlier also, that a serious problem, two kinds of problem. One, we have a problem of internet stability, which happens even in major cities. And I'm happy that today we are able to talk to each other without interruption. Otherwise, internet stability is an issue. And the other was that in a fairly large number of areas which were, there was no internet. And some of it was because of security concerns, as have been mentioned. But not all of that, not all were because of this reason. There were many areas which were just not covered through internet. So I took the initiative and I called all the in IT ministry and others, and I said, we can't go on like this if the internet availability is not there. So, and then I spoke to the Prime Minister, and then Prime Minister took 2 meetings on this subject. and the USF, which is a organization which expands the network. And then we also thought about, in these meetings, we discussed issues like how can we continue education, and if there is a security problem, and I'm not nobody to judge whether anybody is right or not, but there is a security problem. So how do you reach those students who are in areas which like FATA or parts of Balochistan? So therefore, there is a plan now to have what is called education-related content through local area networks, which we hope will be able to. And then you can, if there is a security problem, then you stop the other accessibility, but you continue to have what are white, I don't know, that's one of the terms that I heard, white subjects or whatever, which is that you can have education-related content going through. So there is, obviously, this is a huge problem. And we have seen this as an opportunity also. Why we see this as an opportunity also? Again, let me just, everybody knows this, but just to reinstate, that the federal government is more like a coordinator and so on, because school education is not a part of, but we started an Interprovincial Education Ministers Conference, and we regularly meet through Zoom or some other mechanism. And therefore, that's become a very important forum. So therefore, we are in a sense together engaged in looking at various issues that confront education, particularly school education. So I was very interested in what Dr. Andrabi said, because about reduction of a curriculum as one of the ways that we can move forward. I believe Punjab has already done that. They have reduced the curriculum for the current year. But the real problem is that how can, in a very short time, teachers, especially government school teachers, whose motivation levels, strangely enough, although their pay structure is pretty good, but somehow when people start working for the government, and when you realize that there is no hire and fire, they don't work that much as those in the private sector. So to sort of imagine our government school teachers as becoming doctors and becoming, taking this extra leadership role, while very desirable, and I hope we can continue. We will try our best for that. But I mean, this is going to be a huge challenge for the teachers to come up to that. So what we looking at in the future is that we are going to not discontinue any of the, even when everything opens up and everything, we have established a distance learning wing in our ministry. And we are also in touch with the World Bank, in touch with, the Global Partnership for Education has given us a grant of $20 million. DFID has promised $10 million. So in various monies are becoming available for us to develop new content, for us to look at distance learning. And there are so many opportunities on distance learning. For example, I've been going around and please stop me if you think I'm going on too long, right? Because if you ask me this question, so I have to.
No, Shaikhullah, we would like you to answer these questions. I have a few follow-up questions for you, but please go ahead with the list that you have.
So as far as this the distance learning is concerned, there are so many methodologies we are looking at. One of them is using small projectors, which are not very expensive, to beam lectures from a distance and somehow try and overcome the capacity issues that you find in rural areas, urban areas, low income areas, high income areas, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the things. But I'm not an expert on this, but we are gathering a number of experts on this. So distance learning is very much going to be a part of what we hope to do in the future, even when the schools reopen. On some of the other issues that have been raised, which were not really COVID related, but the examination in the UAT, well, about a month ago, we allowed all educational institutions to hold exams if they wanted to. So this was a national curriculum, national coordination committee decision, and various professional organizations, public service commissions, etc., and various universities for their admission were allowed to hold exams. So this is not something that is that UAT is doing it against the orders of the government or anything. This is part of, and this was also deliberately designed to see that as we move towards 15th September, which is the date that we have notionally given for starting all educational activities, whether some of the examinations and so on, what kind of an impact they are having on the infection. And I think so far we have been very lucky that the infection rates are very low. And hopefully if this continues, we will be in a position to reopen our institutions in a staggered way. We are also working on SOPs, and we are working on what classes should we get in the beginning. And counterintuitively, the health people are saying that ask younger children to come first, and not the older children. So anyway, the whole idea is that if we can move towards opening of educational institutions, this terrible deprivation that is, and as Dr. Andrabi just said, that the earthquake had a huge impact. So this 6 months of lack of education is going to have a huge impact. And we hope that the teachers can come up to the challenge, and the promises are working on this, and we've discussed this very amongst ourselves, and I'm sure they will give their best. But 72 years of neglect of education and what has been going on in education is something that we are confronting right now. All the fault lines are coming out in the open, and therefore it's a big challenge.
Thank you, Shaukat. I think to sort of broadly categorize what you said, I would say, there's a host of issues that have to do with distance learning, with digital learning, and with setting up the infrastructure and the requirements for those in schools and colleges and students' homes to be able to actually do that on a longer term basis, if need be again, or even as a separate or a parallel track, as both you and Professor Bhutbhoy mentioned, even in a world where schools and institutions are open. The second broad theme that we've talked about today, that you have also addressed, is the theme on schools coming back, the needs of children and the needs of teachers, and the ability and the capacity of teachers to be able to respond to those needs. And how that has always been the case, but number one, that need is amplified because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and number two, there is really an opportunity to perhaps be able to reset. And what I heard you say was, we're not entirely sure how that's going to happen and how that's going to be possible at the scale that it is required. I'd like to maybe go back to Professor Andrabi right now and ask, you worked on policy issues for a long time with multiple government administrations and have researched these issues for a long time. How are you thinking about this? Like, what do you think the government, and right now when I say government, I mean federal and most importantly provincial governments, can do to be able to try and scale some of these policies realistically?
Quickly, listen, everybody has made some good points. I mean, the comments that Pervez and Amar made, I mean, these are all worth for discussion and a full session, and so did as did Khatija and so on. So, listen, there are two ways of, one can think about it, right? One is, what is called critique, right? And that the solutions lie in structural changes to education. And what I mean is deep, radical structural change, which I think is important. We really need to do that. But then there is this reform paradigm which says, deep structural reform, we cannot wait for it, or the conditions are not there, or how do we really do that?
Dr. Andrabi, may I interrupt you and ask you, what are deep structural education reforms?
So deep structural education reform might be to change the entire structure of the Higher Education Commission. I think the Higher Education Commission and the way—
You're talking of HEC.
Right, HEC, right? So that's a deep structure, right? A deep structure is changing, for example, the fundamental nature of how universities are funded, how university staffing happens, how tenure happens, teacher recruitment. That's what I mean by a deep structure. That's one example, and we can give many more. The other is thinking about what is called reform in the sense of small changes. And I will take your point on Shafqat Saab on that, which is you said our teachers don't seem to work when they come into government. I think that's something that we really need to address head on. And I think what we want to do is to posit some hypotheses. I mean, if I were to do it as an academic, and look at governance, right? I mean, our teachers are being governed through Islamabad and then Lahore in terms of a very centralized bureaucratic system in Punjab Education Department. There is no local autonomy. The head teacher in Punjab schools has zero authority in terms of managing their schools. So one can experiment with models of governance and school management. I think that's really the key. If we want to really bring teachers into the picture, as Khadija said and others, then what we want to do is to experiment, and this is being done in different places with teacher autonomy, with giving some more resources, support for them, and convert bureaucrats from monitors and supervisors to mentors. I mean, there are cultural changes that one can bring about in school management. So I would really hit into the school management system and try to do some serious large-scale experimental work on that. That would be another example of a reform.
Thank you, Dr. Dhavi. So I think, I mean, I know we've all talked about multiple different things, and I think we're talking about levels of reform and levels of changes at different levels of education. So we're talking about primary and secondary school, and we're talking about higher education, and those come with their own very large challenges. So I think the question really is what can be done now, right? What I would like to really understand is there something we can do now in the next 4 weeks or in the next 4 months as we go back to be able to start, Shafqat Saab, to at least be able to start on the journey towards this paradigm shift that Khadija and others have brought up, right?
Well, first of all, let's hope that we are able to open the schools, because I'm getting a large number of counter arguments from all sides, and Israel example is given, and New York, the infection rate among children went up. So, it's not a done deal as far as middle of September is concerned. Although the private schools are really going through a very, especially low fee paying private schools, going through a very difficult time. And many of them are going to close because nobody's paying them the fee and they are unable to pay their teachers. So we are concerned about the unemployment that's coming up, and really a real serious problem. So, but obviously health, we are going to be guided by our health people, and it's only after they give us the assurance then we'll open the schools. So let's say, okay, all goes well, we are able to open the schools, we are able to enforce the SOPs. Clearly, we'll have to look at two things. One, how can we get the teachers to give that little extra? And my own, I'm a bit cynical because having worked in government off and on for many years, I find that because of a variety of factors, including lifetime employment, where everybody knows that they can't be fired, so people stop working in government, and very few do. So which is a sad thing, because that is reflected in not only education, but in all sorts of other affairs that relate to government. So Dr. Amdrabi has given some good ideas. Maybe if you change the models of governance, if you are able to give more autonomy to local schools, etc., perhaps. So these are some of the ideas that I hope to take from this meeting. But also I hope that the distance learning, for some reason, technology, I'm very gung-ho on technology. I really think that we have serious roadblocks in making a change. And one of the things that can help us leapfrog over all of these things is technology. Although many educationists do not agree with this, they don't look at technology with the same kind of enthusiasm as I'm looking at it. But I feel that we are able to do, we could perhaps, if we have the money and we make an investment in it, we can completely change teacher training. We don't have to bring them into institutions in big cities for 3 weeks or so. We can train them where they are in their school. We can change the nature of rural schools in the sense that the teachers become facilitators, and you can have lectures being beamed to them through either internet or through USBs and so on. So, you know, you can completely change adult learning. You can have accelerated learning programs in which you can use technology to reach to women. You can who refuse to go. The parents refuse to send them out of the house, and we don't have enough schools for them to. So the whole area of informal education added with with technology, if you can use informal education, and so I mean the possibilities are endless, and we are I am very enthusiastic about it, and we've had some possibility through various funding sources. So we are going to try various methodologies and try and improve the quality of teaching that is imparted to students. So once that happens, I mean, it's a long journey. I am very mindful of the fact that what we've been doing for 70 odd years, we can't completely change it in a short period of time, but we will make an effort. And I look at these two things, some reforms that Dr. Indrabi has suggested and technology as giving us a possibility of way forward.
Right. Thank you, Shafqat Saab. What you said is sparked responses, I think, from a number of our panelists, and have led to more questions from the audience. But I know Khadija wants to say something, and I know Dr. Hudbhoy wants to say something. So Khadija, maybe you can go first, and then we can go to Dr. Hudbhoy.
Thank you, Zainab. I was just going to say, to Shafqat Saab, I think you and I have had a long-standing discussion about EdTech, so I'm not going to discuss that here. But I look forward to continuing that discussion, and I'm always so grateful for how open you are to listening and trying to understand other points of view. But on the issue of teachers and their role, I mean, I think to the point that Tahir was making earlier, I just wanted to note, I think there's so many like anecdotal examples that I have seen through COVID of public school teachers, like right here in Islamabad, who have taken a stand and said, whatever else may be happening, I'm going to make it possible for my kids to get, all of our kids to get learning packs. I'm going to make sure that my teachers are on it and they are setting up WhatsApp groups and getting the kids who it is possible for us to engage, getting them engaged. 3 days ago, I heard of a principal who has said, I'm going to start bringing some kids back to test some of the SOPs that we're going to have to implement once the schools do reopen. So I think there's a lot of reason for hope in the system, within the system, which and I also, so there's hope, and I think there's also kind of, I think a little bit toward what Shafqat Saab was alluding to earlier. Shafqat Saab is actually really inspiring because, as you were saying, they have no reason to, it's not like they have a lot of systemic pressure with our fellows and our teachers. We have, we're supporting them, we're on them, we're helping them remember the important things. But so I think that those examples are great. And I think it gives me a lot of hope. But also the other thing I was saying was the thing you were alluding to earlier. I don't think we really have a choice, and I think that that if we take some baby steps and the things that Tahir was suggesting earlier, very specific steps, right? Let them know that the pressure is not about completing the syllabus. Let them know that we have trust in you and we'll back up the instructional decisions that you take in the classroom to meet the actual goal, right? And simplify for them what the goal is this year, right? So even when we're talking about, teachers leading change within their schools, I don't think that that's a one-step journey that happens, overnight or even over 6 months, but I think those baby steps can lead us on the path to that.
Thank you, Khadija. Dr. Hudbhoy? You're on mute, Dr. Hudbhoy.
I don't think it's technology or looking for funding from foreign sources that's going to solve our problem. The real issue is, what are we teaching kids in our schools? If you just take funding, well, Pakistan is spending more per student as compared to either India or Iran and even Bangladesh. And yet the learning outcomes are poorer. Why are they poorer? Well, you look at the curriculum, you look at the textbooks, you look at the examinations, And they will tell you how rote memorization is really at the core of our education system. And now here is the challenge. If you really want to improve education, you don't need fancy technology stuff. It's good if you have it. And of course, now there's, with COVID, we've been forced into a corner. But the real issue is you look at our textbooks and you look at our examinations. Now, there are something like, I believe, 26, 27 examination boards. Look at the kind of questions that they ask and compare them with O and A levels. You'll see that the local boards require rote memorization. They don't test your actual internalization of the subject, they test how well you can remember. And so what's the outcome? You folks are at Harvard. How often do you see somebody who's gone through the matriculation and FSC system as compared to those who've gone through O and A levels? In fact, at the time that I was at MIT, there wasn't a single undergraduate who had done his or her metric and FSC. And I believe that's pretty much true even today. But that's not something that needs a whole lot of funding. It needs structural change of those boards. Fix those boards, change the nature of examination questions, and you'll go a very long way. On the other hand, if you start emphasizing religious stuff, memorization, rote memorization, you might make them very good parrots, but I'm afraid you won't get them into Harvard.
Thank you, Dr. Hudoy. I'd like to give Dr. Amar a chance to quickly respond to what Shafqat Saab said. And I know we don't have too much time left and we have about over 200 questions from the audience. So I'm not going to do all of them, but going to filter through them and going to ask you some of those questions. Dr. Amar?
Thank you so much. I think it's very good that there is this open discussion happening. And I do realize that the challenge is really big and the situation is very difficult. But what we've seen over the last few years, and particularly over the past few months, is that we have to question whether we are going in the right direction or not. I mean, who are the big stakeholders in the system? Forget about students. If the chairman of HEC can publicly state that this is the worst condition financially that the HEC has ever been in, and he blames the government for it, then we're not talking about structural reform, or we're not demanding the world or a revolution. We're talking about a situation where we're seeing a slow dismantling of higher education. And these are his words. This is Tariq Banouri's interview to Musharraf Zaidi. It's on YouTube. And this is what we're hearing from parents. This is what we're hearing from teachers. I mean, Khadija was talking about teachers and private schools. I mean, these private schools, and we're talking about private schools for working class kids. The Minister Saab rightly pointed out that they're shutting down. And yet you have principals and teachers who have been meeting for the past few months. They're representative of teachers unions, of principals unions, and they've been trying to see how to encourage students to continue their education. And I've seen that, I've worked with them. Their biggest frustration is that it's almost impossible for them to meet with government representatives, to get any support from government representatives.
That is government private school teachers?
Private.
Oh, okay.
Because they're the ones who are catering to a large section of working class population. In most, at least in Lahore, everywhere we've been to, these are the schools where a lot of working class kids are studying. These are schools that are charging about 300 to 500 rupees per month. And their teachers are working at sometimes 18,000, 20,000, but they're closing down. They're literally closing down. And we're talking about, like when we were doing this labor relief campaign, we had to give food rations, like literally. I mean, this is the state where teachers are at right now. So I think the key point that I just want to emphasize is that whether it's teachers, whether it's students, whether it's these principals, these are stakeholders. And if they're saying that things are heading in the wrong direction, then there needs to be a serious national dialogue on what to do with education. My biggest concern, I mean, we can't talk about all solutions here, but the biggest concern is if we can take on board, not just experts who will remain nameless and faceless, but people who are working on the ground, that will already mark a significant shift. And we will not see a situation where so many people will feel abandoned in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that is where the tabdili needs to happen.
I think I'd like to answer that. I'll only caution one thing, and it's not only because what Amar has said, but generally speaking, that we can cherry pick a few things and generalize and come to broad conclusions about that. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about that. Let me start by HEC. Banoori did give that statement, and I asked him that in the last 2 years, the development budget of the universities has gone up from 15 billion to 29 billion. I mean, there was a 14 billion increase in the development budget of universities in the last 2 years. And these are figures which are published figures. We are not talking about, now on the non-development side, yes, there is a problem on the non-development side. The problem on the non-development side is that we have kept adding universities after universities. There are 205 universities now in Pakistan, and maybe more coming up. And these universities have been, you know what the staff to faculty ratio is in some of these universities? 1:9, 1:12, 1:8, 1:7. Now, many of you have studied in American universities. You tell me that what is that how much staff is looking after a faculty. So the result is that there has been in the last many years absolute political recruitment in the universities, with the result that the non-development, I mean, University of Peshawar and others, 1:9. So the question is that yes, we are trying to get more, HSC asked for 70 billion, they got 65 billion, which is what I think the kind of language Banoori used was uncalled for. And because 65 billion was a little bit more than what they got last year. But we have to make sure that we are not profligate with the money that is coming. Money is tight. Money is tight. So I think these broad generalizations, I completely and totally reject them. Now we come to teachers and small private schools. I've been meeting private school owners. In fact, yesterday I had 2 meetings with private school owners, and these are ones charging very low fee. Their problem is not with the government. Their problem is that the parents are refusing to deposit the fee because the schools are closed. And because the parents are refusing to deposit the fee, therefore the schools are unable to pay the teachers. So they are going through a bit of a crisis. In fact, they're going through a huge crisis. And they have asked us that please open the schools. So we have told them that we will open the schools, but we have to keep the health of the children in view. In fact, I've asked the State Bank governor to try and let's have a scheme for these private schools so that they can get low interest loans to tide them over this period. So there are a lot of difficulties that COVID has created for the private school sector. Even the elite schools, and some of them have been meeting me also, they are in distress also because they're about 60% fees coming in, 40% is not coming in. So even they are under pressure.
The difference is that the upper end private schools will manage to tide through, whereas the lower end private schools may actually, like large percentages of them may shut down. And given that they account for more than 40% of the enrollment in Pakistan, we might have a major access crisis on our hands in addition to an unemployment.
It's not 40% of entire enrollment. It is 40% perhaps of the private school enrollment.
40% of primary school enrollment, low-cost private schools are the last numbers that we had access to.
Government has the largest number of schooling is in the government sector, not in the private.
60% government and 40% private is about the
ignoring 3 to 4 million who go to madrasas. They also go to school. They are children of this country also.
Yeah, absolutely. So so when we say low-cost private, we sort of add the madrasas into the private. Dr. Andrabi can talk more about this, but I mean non-government is what I was saying. But the point of all of this, Shafqat Saab, is that a lot of people are really feeling the pinch, right? And what we're trying to figure out is, can we put our heads together and do something, to figure out what is needed to move forward together in something that is clearly close to, all our hearts, right? And so, but before I go on, I know Dr. Andrabi wants to make a point also, but before I go on, there are a bunch of more practical sort of questions coming in from the audience that we do need to highlight. Shafqat Saab, most of them are directed towards you, so I'm sorry about that in advance.
Me holding a press conference.
Even a press conference that might have been a better format indeed. Yeah. But the one question that we've gotten in multiple variations of this one question repeatedly is the UET question about how government, like schools everywhere else, are not allowed to open, but the government has given permission to UET to resume on-campus examinations.
No, it's not UET. What happened was that in early July, we got large number of representations from private associations, from, for example, Institute of Chartered Accountants, from various schools, from various universities who wanted to do entrance exams. So we analyzed the situation, and from the 15th of July, we gave a general permission to anybody who was wanting to hold special exams, entrance exams, or any such thing. The second permission that we gave was that we allowed all educational institutions to call their staff to open their admin offices and prepare for the opening of the schools. So therefore, what UAT, I'm not talking of UAT specifically because I don't know. I don't deal. UAT is part of Punjab. It's not a part of federal government. So, but I'm talking about a general the permission which was accorded to everybody, to madrasas, to others, to hold exams if they want to. And many of them have been holding exams. And I from what I guess is UAT is also holding some special exam for admission or something like that, and which is very much part of the overall permission given. And by the way, now after the 10th of August, we've opened restaurants, we've opened hotels, we've opened transport. So now the situation is very different from what we did in July.
Okay. And then the other question that we've gotten in a couple of different formats also has to do with the O and A level examinations and how there has been some discontent with grades, and other countries' governments have taken it up with Cambridge University, and Pakistan is one of the largest markets of the O and A level system. People are wondering, is this something that the government plans to take up or to acknowledge, since there are a lot of futures at stake here?
I think if those who have seen my tweets, I immediately took up the matter with Cambridge because largely I think it's the A level exam which has a more serious problem than the O level. But I immediately took it up with Cambridge, and I also took it up with the British High Commission because British Council is involved, and so I believe that they have conveyed our misgivings and our reservations to the Cambridge International, which is in the UK. And apparently there have been problems in the UK also. There have been certain protests over there also. So we are pursuing it quite vehemently. And I'm cautiously hopeful that something will come out. And then we will also look at some other in-country things that we can do, which I don't want to talk about right now. But let's first see what happens from Cambridge.
Thank you. Another question from the audience is regarding building up infrastructure, particularly infrastructure to allow digital learning, even within schools and in more rural centers. Is that something that's on the agenda in terms of, I know you said the budget was tight, but is that something that the provincial and federal government are planning to put into place?
You see, as I said, in general, since I'm a great proponent of technology, so we are going to increase as much possible of digitalization and we are negotiating various possibilities through which we can fund also some of the digital, initiatives in the schools. But again, this is essentially a provincial government matter. And while we will encourage them, help them, but it's how much of the budget that goes into digitalization of schools is something that the provincial governments, but I would strongly encourage it.
Okay. Then there's more questions about assessments in general, how they are going to be managed in the post-COVID time. I'd like to, because this is not a press conference, I'd like to maybe expand questions to other panelists. Dr. Andabi, would you like to say something in specific regarding both assessments and the questions on teachers and teacher capacity?
I'll support what Parvez said, which is, Shafkat Saab, and you need to take this seriously, that the key problem here is in Pakistani education, at least at the lower end, is the examination system. Examinations determine the incentives. All incentives are completely aligned. The teachers' incentives, the parents' incentives are to get results on the examination. And that is really what forces this whole rote memorization system. And it's really coming from the British, right? The separation between instruction and assessment, where the university is the assessment body and the college is the instruction body. What we have really done is taken away the power from the instructor. I mean, who is the best person to judge a student's capability? It's the teacher. It's not some third-party examination. So this whole idea that we have taken away the centrality of the teacher in the education system and given authority to somebody else, some bureaucrat, some section officer who's setting up the examination system in all these boards are completely dysfunctional. So what I would say is that post-COVID, one of the simple things that we can do, especially at the lower ends where we don't fortunately have board exams, and Punjab has stopped the PEC exam in 5th grade, which I think is a great thing, is to move towards formative assessments, when we really need to know where kids stand and how to work with them on improving it. So this whole centralized examination system and the board examination system, I think if there is one thing that we can all agree on, that the system is broke, it's that system. And I think that, get power back to the schools, get power back to the teachers, take it away from the centralized authorities who are setting up these exams. And we have talked to them. Faisal and Bari and I at LUMS, we did this whole workshops with these guys. These guys are completely against reform. You can't even have a conversation with these people because they are so vested. And I think we need to really break this examination. I would say send it back to schools, move it to formative assessments, and it is being done, especially in K through 5. We can at least start with that.
Thank you, Dr. Andabi. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Well, I mean, I'm no expert. You people are educationists and experts. And when we were doing our curriculum exercise, I in fact advertised for institutions of higher education and so on to come and become our partners. And I will not go into what happened over there. But the point is that yes, we would like to have the best possible assessment system. I think there is, and this is from a non-education person. I mean, I'm not an educationist, but my gut feeling is that the centralized examination system, besides a kind of a historical hangover, is also because of a lack of trust, I think, within our, if you will, the new words I've learned, ecosystem. And so therefore, because of this lack of trust, we think that local authorities or local schools, etc., would cheat and get their students, give their students high. In fact, one of the problems that has happened this time in the O level and A level is that the grades were given by the schools. And that Cambridge used an algorithm which slashed I don't know what to call it, but if somebody was getting an A is now at C, because their algorithm probably had this built-in thing that the schools are overrating their students. So I don't know. I think, or in general, I agree with you. I don't exactly know what formative examination is, but I will find out. And I think these are good ideas, and we'll certainly work with FASL, and whenever you are here or online, help us in devising some kind of a better assessment system.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we've actually completely run out of time. We are going to run a little bit over, but this has been a very exciting and spirited discussion, so we've let it run a little bit over. I would like to circle back to our panelists and give you all 1 minute of a closing statement. In an ideal world, my request would be to focus that 1 minute on the one thing that you think should be happening now that can really get us into a better place, or at least set the trajectory towards a better place in a post-COVID world. Amar, I'd like to maybe start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think one thing is it's clear that there needs to be a very open, transparent discussion. And when we talk about these schools that are closing down, they are expecting some kind of an education package. Let me be clear. This is what they're expecting because they've seen how other private sectors, like, for example, the construction company, they've been bailed out. So people are expecting more government intervention, more safeguards, and more ownership. So I think one thing that has become clear because of this pandemic is that we have to change our priorities. Education, just like many other things, are in a state of crisis. And we have to listen to the stakeholders, and really, it's not about cutting the funding or increasing the funding a little bit. It's really about having a very thorough discussion, an open, transparent discussion with all stakeholders involved on how we can rethink this education system and make it work for young people in this country.
Thank you, Amar, and perhaps civil society can take a role in that also, and start setting that up, and then getting government engagement on board also. But thank you very much, Ms. Khadija. Can I go to you next?
Thank you, Zainab. Yeah, I think actually you just said what I was going to say so and so articulately. I think really I would say the one thing is we have to remember that the challenge is absolutely massive, and no one knew when it started what to do and how to do it. And so I think we need to own that this is a collective problem, and it is. I think so many debates right now are so divisive, and they turn into a government versus everybody else, or between society extremes, polemical extremes, extreme debates. And I don't think that makes sense, because particularly in a time like this, I think we have to talk about what is my role and how can I help. And one thing that I would say, which I've experienced is fantastic with this particular government, is that there is a lot of openness to saying, come and help us and do this with us. And so I think if there's like, that is one thing that stands out to me as a real opportunity for us in this time where that's so needed.
Thank you. Thank you, Khadija. Dr. Hoodboy? You're on mute, Dr. Hoodboy.
I'm very happy that Tahir and I are on the same wavelength on the issue of assessment. I think it's absolutely vital. I'm going to say that for the 10th and the 12th year exams, we should be doing what our neighbors are doing. Look at India, look at Iran. They have high school systems which produce far better quality graduates than we do. And this is why they're reaping the benefits of that. I mean, those two countries are now light years ahead of us. And you can see that in terms of their technologies. You can see in the case of Iran, how it's got America so terribly worried these days. If we want to improve education, there are many things to be done, but improve the assessment system, which means get rid of these nonsensical 24, 25 boards, reconstitute them, and follow the pattern that the other two, our neighbors, are following. This is not rocket science, it's common sense.
Thank you, Dr. Hoodboy. Dr. Andrabi?
Yeah, I think what we have to really say, the good news is that Pakistan में the demand for education is through the roof. अगर पाकिस्तान को, मैं उर्दू में कहूँगा क्योंकि बहुत अंग्रेजी होगी, अगर पाकिस्तान को इस वक्त कोई चीज़ स्टेबल रख रही है और इसको चल रही है, वो पाकिस्तानी वालदैन है. पाकिस्तानी वालदैन की जो कमिटमेंट अपने बच्चों के लिए एजुकेशन पे है, उनकी जो विलिंगनेस टू पे है, और मैं सिर्फ शहरों में नहीं बात कर रहा, मैं पिंडों देहातों हर जगह की बात कर रहा हूँ, वो है. It is the supply side of education which is a real mess. It is the delivery of education that is a real problem. So ये सारा रिफॉर्म जो है ये डिलीवरी की साइड पे है. So the good news is कि ये जो पुराना हमारा ख्याल था कि जी लड़कियों को पढ़ाना नहीं चाहते, तो ये हमारे तोहमात हैं या हम लोग ट्रेडिशनल हैं या ट्राइबल हैं, वो सब गलत है. जितनी पाकिस्तानी वालदैन को पेरेंट्स की है, तो शौकत साहब ये आप लोगों के लिए इस वक्त सबसे बड़ा इशू है, बिकॉज द डिमांड फॉर एजुकेशन, चाहे वो हायर एजुकेशन है हर तरफ, और खासतौर पर लड़कियों की एजुकेशन, पाकिस्तान में एक पिवट आ गया है ऑन फीमेल एनरोलमेंट. ये अब वापस नहीं जाएगा. पाकिस्तान में हायर एजुकेशन सेक्टर इस वक्त 40 लड़कियों पर आ है. सो हर जगह पे है, एजुकेशन इज अ जेंडर्ड फील्ड. सो रिस्पॉन्स इज प्रॉब्लम इज विद अस एक्सपर्ट्स एंड विद यू द गवर्नमेंट who is just not stepping up. I think the public is ready to really invest, give money, and support you. I think we are behind now.
Thank you, Dr. Andavi. I think आज के दिन 14 अगस्त वाला दिन is I think a great day, a momentous day to have this conversation and to really bring this point out. Shafqat Saab, you have the last word.
No, I've enjoyed the discussion. I think some very interesting ideas have come up. I would invite all the educationists to come and help us. Believe me, as Khatija just said, that we are open to ideas. Our minds are not closed. We want to finish this apartheid in our education system. We want to finish this divide. We want to give opportunity to the poorest of the poor, to those who have been neglected in the past. I'm surprised that in this last 70 odd years, we have not looked at the assessment systems. I don't know what in the past our educationists have been doing, because these things should have been decided a long time ago. But anyway, we are going to play our role. I will certainly do my part in looking at the assessment systems and so on. We are unrolling a new curriculum, which we think is an outstanding curriculum. And assessment is going to be very much a part of it. So we'll work very hard on this. And I think we're all on the same page. We just have different opinions, and that's a good thing because we learn from each other. And I invite all the educationists to come and come and help us. And we want to do good. There's no personal interest involved in this. It's a national interest, and we all want to do. And I can assure you that Prime Minister Imran Khan is fully committed to supporting us. And we will work together and bring about the change that we want to.
Thank you very much, Shafqat Saab. Thank you all for joining us. This has been an extremely enlightening conversation. I think many more of these need to happen, specifically with more specific topics. And I think we all need to take Shafqat Saab up on this offer and really go in and have our voices heard and help do our bits, as Khadija said. With that, I will hand back over to our hosts at the Harvard Pakistan Forum, Asmar and Usman. Back to you guys.
Thank you so much for everyone that joined in. We're going to be having 2 more panels tomorrow at the same time. At HPF, we believe in transparency and conversation, to basically echo Dr. Amar Ali Jan. And so we're thankful to our experts, academics, and again, Mr. Minister for being here and having this conversation with us. Happy Independence Day from the Harvard Pakistan Forum. Pakistan Zindabad. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asma.
Thank you.